Hi everybody, it's me, Catherine. So love and light are not enough, and the fact is they've never been enough. And the nature of the times right now, in case you've been living under a massive rock, the nature of the times right now are raw, 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 and explosive. And so it's just everything is coming to light now. We have the biggest trigger in human history, at least in modern history. Donald Trump is president. He's basically everybody's trigger. And what that means is everything's coming up to the surface, what we hate, what we resist, what we judge, what we're afraid of most of all. And so we live in these times, these explosive times where everything is just exploding, coming to the surface like a big volcano. And so it's become more and more obvious, the anger, the fear that lives in us. And so having a spiritual practice is a very different thing now than it used to be. So it used to be the case that we would say love and light, let's just meditate. I know for me personally, it was definitely the case, like let's just meditate, let's get calm. Like being spiritual was equated with being calm. And that covered up a lot of very real aliveness in human beings. Now, I was a Buddhist. I identified as a Buddhist for many years, since my teenage years. For over a decade, I identified as such. And Buddhism is completely, it completely complements activism. I'm not saying that Buddhism makes you passive at all or makes you ignore the world's problems. Quite the opposite, because it encourages mindfulness. But in any event, the way that I realized I was using Vipassana Buddhist meditation was to get rid of my feelings, was to get rid of feelings that I decided were unspiritual, such as anger and sadness and fear and judgment. And there's a problem with that, because when we, or somebody like me, who has been socialized, in my white middle class family, as most of people who are a part of my demographic are, if you're socialized to keep your feelings to yourself, keep those negative emotions to yourself, go to your room, figure it out, then come back, don't get angry. If you're somebody like me who's been socialized like that, then it's natural to then adopt a spiritual practice and to interpret that spiritual practice as just doing something similar, namely quieting those feelings. And in so doing, it becomes the same oppressor of your childhood. And so if you're continuing right now in the days that we're in to think of spirituality in terms of love and light, and thinking of emotions like anger as unspiritual, you're going to hit a rut really fast. You might start to feel like you're disconnected from yourself, because in truth you are. So when we cut ourselves off from those feelings, we are splitting ourselves off. We're piecing ourselves off, fragmenting ourselves off from ourselves. So what our time right now requires of us is to come vibrantly, passionately alive, to unsplit, unfragment ourselves, to become whole. That is my definition of healing, is to integrate those previously split fragments that all of us have when we learned in childhood that parts of ourselves or some emotions are appropriate and some are not. And so I love these times, as horrible, as terrifying as they are. It's bringing everything up to the surface so that you can see what parts of yourself you're really uncomfortable with, and thus what you might want to think about getting more comfortable with. So I am encouraging you, if you're on a spiritual path, and by spiritual path I mean you're interested in knowing who you are, knowing who you truly are, you're interested in knowing the meaning of life as you define it, and you're interested in connecting with something greater than yourself. That's the spiritual path for me, and becoming the fullest person that you can be on this planet, in this body. And if that's your path, then you really need to ride this wave that's coming up energetically that's around us right now, and get in touch with your anger. So for example, we just had another school shooting that happened here in the United States. So my Facebook feed is just covered in grief and anger and gun control articles. And that is amazing. I mean, it's amazing how alive that brings us. It's a horrible thing that happened, and I wish that it didn't have to happen that way. But what I'm suggesting is to allow yourself to feel the fullest extent of that anger that you have, be it inspired by a school shooting or anything else, or the president, or anything else that's coming up for you. Feel the fullest extent of that anger, of that grief, and know that your emotions are information about you and not about other people. This is really important. So when we're doing this, some people call it shadow work, and really expressing those pieces of ourselves that have previously been banished or are uncomfortable for us, it's very important to take full responsibility for your emotions and to know that they're yours. They're about you. So anytime you catch yourself blaming, and a little of this is fine, but if you catch yourself blaming with that emotion, know that that's not true. It is about you. It's about your anger. Let me just check in a little bit. So for example, if you feel really worked up, as many of us do during these times, and you're around the house doing your chores and you just feel so worked up, so angry, and you're scrubbing the dishes like this, notice that in yourself, take responsibility for that, and feel those feelings and express them in a way that will not hurt other people. So if you have kids, don't then just channel those into yelling at the kids, because it doesn't have to do with them, it's about you. So, or your partner or something like that. Or if you run into a Trump supporter and you just want to punch him in the face, don't punch him in the face. You can feel all of your feelings to the fullest extent without punching somebody in the face. Just be very present with your desire to punch somebody in the face. And you might ask yourself, and this is a really important question, you might ask yourself too, especially with anger, what am I protecting? So what does this feeling protect? If this were a figure in my consciousness, if this were an aspect of myself that I personified as the protector, which anger is, what am I protecting? And that will allow you an arrow that takes you down into your truest values, that takes you down into the heart of really what you want life to be about, be it compassion, love. And so anger is just an incredible pointer to who you really are. And so when we have in the past, or even today sometimes, focused our spiritual practice on the love, the light, the so-called high vibrational emotions, which they technically might be, but they're part of a spectrum that we need to experience to be alive, a full spectrum. When you're focusing just on those high vibrational emotions, you are ignoring the very source of your aliveness and the very pointers to what you truly value. Namely, when we react to something out of anger, that'll point us straight back. It's usually the quickest way to know what we value is what we're reacting against. So a similar thing is with judgment. So recently I've gone through a re-befriending of judgment, because I used to think of judgment as a purely unspiritual so-called emotion, namely that whenever I'm judging somebody, it is 100% only about me judging the part of myself that they represent. So for example, if I was judging a guy is just walking into a room and taking up too much space and being loud and not respecting other people, well, there's part of me that I'm banishing that really wants to be loud and big and take up space. And that's actually been quite true for me throughout my life. But the fact is that might all be true. Judgment is a beautiful mirror, just like that. And it's also a beautiful way to know where we're drawing a boundary for ourselves. What is important to us? What do we value? And so to think of judgment is that way, as the great discriminator. It discriminates who we are, who we want to be, who we do not want to be. To take that also into account is really powerful. So also judgment can be embraced as just as spiritual of an emotion and another bit of information to tell you who you are. So that's it for now, and I'll see you later.